Brian Welker couldn't help but smile as he wiped the sweat from his brow. Earlier that day, he had been promoted to shift foreman at Harding Containers, effective immediately. The icing on the cake was the night shift schedule he would be working for the foreseeable future. While many people dislike night shifts, it worked perfectly for Brian. With his son being a junior in high school, participating in various sports and clubs, working nights meant Brian could attend his son's activities without missing work. Over the years, Brian had developed a system for sleeping during the day, making it all manageable for him. That's why he found himself crawling across roof trusses in his attic on a warm August afternoon. He had been granted Thursday and Friday off with pay after learning of his promotion, giving him time to rest and prepare for his new position starting on Sunday night. Brian had long planned to convert a small apartment over his detached garage into his own space where he could peacefully sleep during the day. He hoped to avoid the usual disruptions and distractions that came with trying to sleep when most people were awake and active. As he worked on running a cable for internet access in his apartment, Brian heard faint sounds coming from inside his house. Knowing his wife, Brenda, would be at work at that time and their son, Tim, was visiting Brenda's parents, the house should have been empty. Curious, Brian crawled closer to investigate. The noises were coming from his bedroom, and as he approached, he realized it was voices. He settled over an unused air conditioning vent in the bedroom ceiling and listened in. His gut wrenched when he saw his wife of 20 years with another man on their marital bed. Despite the pain, Brian couldn't tear his eyes away. He decided to record the scene on his phone, carefully placing it on the vent for an unobstructed view. The man spoke crudely about Brian, but Brenda weakly defended her husband, claiming he was a good lover and father. Brian silently recorded everything, feeling a mix of betrayal and disbelief at the scene unfolding before him. "I'm sure he is. I'm getting ready to drop a big load inside your pussy right here in his bed, yet you insist you're happy with how he fucks you. What's wrong with this picture?" remarked Brenda's lover. "I don't know why I let you talk me into doing this here." "Ah. Right there. There's no chance of being caught in your apartment." "I'm going to come," groaned Brenda. The couple became very still for a minute after the man covering Brenda tensed up and then rolled off her. "See how intense it is when you take chances," said Brenda's lover, identified as Bill Grant, a colleague of Brian's and Brenda's. "Fucking in my apartment works great most of the time, but banging you in your marital bed takes it to another level." "That sounds terrible," Brenda replied with little emotion. "You wanted to have sex in my bed because it turns you on to think you've put one over on Brian? You act like it's a competition or something." "It is a competition, at least for men," chuckled Grant. "You're a sexy woman, and the sex is great, but knowing you're married and I'm having sex with you in your husband's bed makes me the winner. It feels incredible. It wouldn't feel so great if Brian caught us here. I don't know why I agreed to this, but it won't happen again. I'm worried about Brian discovering us." "It would ruin my marriage," admitted Brenda. "Let's make a deal," suggested Grant. "As long as you shut off your husband, I won't insist we do it in his bed. Once he gets between your legs again, we'll have to return so I can reclaim my place as top dog. I'm not going to refuse Brian. He's my husband. I can't just close my legs and expect him to go along with it," reasoned Brenda. "He's a man and wants sex on a regular basis. You do what you have to do, but keep in mind I'll be balls deep inside you in this very bed as soon as possible if he fucks you." "Maybe that excites you as much as it does me," replied Grant. "Look how hard your nipples are getting. You're turned on." "That's the damn air conditioning," Brenda brushed it off. "I'll try to discourage Brian from having sex and keep these suicide meetings in my bedroom to a minimum. I don't like to think about what would happen if Brian ever caught us." Unbeknownst to Brenda, Brian was listening to their entire conversation from the attic, hidden from view. Sweat dripped from his body as he resisted the urge to vomit. Despite the grim discovery, he managed a smile. Brenda's plan to withhold sex from him wouldn't matter, as he had already made up his mind never to touch her again. While showering, Brian contemplated his situation and reached several swift conclusions. He resolved not to confront Brenda about her infidelity. With 2 years left until Tim finished high school, Brian determined to prioritize his son above all else. Brenda's feelings and desires were no longer of concern to him. Her evident disdain rendered him indifferent to her wishes. Refusing to relinquish the house he had painstakingly renovated over 15 years, Brian refused to allow some unscrupulous interloper to inhabit it luxuriously while engaging in an affair with his wife. Since Brenda didn't seem inclined toward divorce, Brian resolved to endure until Tim graduated. Realizing he needed his apartment sooner than planned, Brian decided to expedite its completion with significant upgrades, transforming it into his permanent residence for the next year and a half. Contacting contractors for estimates, he opted to hire professionals, prioritizing efficiency over penny pinching. With his promotion, Brian recognized the value of his time over money for the first time. Disillusioned by Brenda's betrayal, Brian resolved to allocate half of any savings for Tim's college education and to rebuild his life with a newfound sense of liberation from his unfaithful wife. When Brenda arrived home from work and found Brian in the kitchen, he observed her differently, noticing signs of aging and weight gain he had previously overlooked. Reflecting on his changed perspective, Brian attributed it to Brenda's decision to have an affair, resigning himself to this new reality. Upon suggesting he take a nap, Brenda's sudden interruption, remembering the state of the bed linens, struck Brian as suspicious. "Sure thing," Brian replied calmly, a wry chuckle escaping him at Brenda's discomfort. "I'll just use the guest room bed. No need to get worked up about it." Later that evening, Brian left the house as if heading to work, but instead stopped at a local sports bar to watch a baseball game and enjoy a few beers. Having prepared an air mattress in his future apartment, he waited until Brenda was asleep before parking in the garage and making his way up to his makeshift bed. Surprisingly, he slept well. The following day, one of the contractors Brian interviewed offered a compelling price if work could start immediately. Brian agreed, signing the contract for Monday morning. With his night shift scheduled from Sunday through Thursday, Brian decided to avoid disrupting Brenda's sleep during his adjustment to the night schedule. "Why are you sleeping in the guest room?" Brenda asked, puzzled. "Since I worked last night and had some sleep this morning, I'm not very tired. I plan to watch a baseball game and maybe a movie," Brian replied with his prepared excuse. "I'm trying to get used to staying awake at night and sleeping during the day. I'm pretty tired tonight. Maybe we could just cuddle and sleep?" Brenda suggested, avoiding intimacy. "Cuddling won't suffice for me," Brian responded firmly. "If you're ruling out sex, I'll sleep in the guest room to eliminate temptation." Brenda's feeble excuses only confirmed Brian's suspicions. He spent Saturday with Tim, engaging in activities and yard work, before retiring to the guest room for the night. As he headed to work early Sunday, Brian felt content with his decision not to disclose his promotion to Brenda, recognizing her own secrecy. His transition to the new shift went smoothly, finding the team under him receptive and competent. Brian felt confident in his ability to handle the added responsibilities, having encountered similar issues in the past. Adjusting to the new role was surprisingly easy. Arriving home to the construction crew setup, Brian ensured they were aligned on the project's goals before retiring for some much-needed rest. Despite the crew's noise and a ringing phone, he managed to catch some sleep, albeit interrupted. Answering Beverly's call, Brian's irritation was evident, especially when she inquired about his sleep. Disconnecting the phone, he marveled at people's lack of awareness before returning to slumber. The remodeling progressed swiftly, impressing Brian with the efficiency of the contractor. By Friday afternoon, he had arranged for furnishings and appliances to complete his bachelor pad by Monday. Brenda's confusion upon returning home to the bustling construction site amused Brian, who explained his plan for the apartment as a quiet retreat during his night shifts. Brenda's insistence on knowing his whereabouts challenged Brian's notion of privacy within the marriage. Brian's suggestion of a private discussion was met with Brenda's expectation of more from their relationship than mere physical intimacy, highlighting her desire for emotional connection and partnership. "Save your lectures on marriage, Brian. I'll match my efforts in this marriage against yours any day. This arrangement will be just fine. All you have to do is let me know when you're ready for some action," warned Brian. "I'm not some object that needs servicing," snapped Brenda. "You won't be servicing anything until you offer a sincere apology. And I'll expect a nice dinner out as part of that apology, you jerk." Brian's grin widened as he walked away, leaving Brenda bewildered. He was making it clear to Bill Grant that Brenda's marital bed was off limits, but Brenda couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Brian's behavior. He wasn't his usual attentive self, and that worried her. She resolved to give him a memorable night once he apologized for his rudeness. She knew he wouldn't last much longer without sex. A man who's used to regular intimacy can't suddenly go without and stay content. Brenda was confident Brian would come around. He'd always had a healthy appetite for it since they met. He was too young to lose interest. By the following Wednesday, Brian had fully settled into his new apartment. With the Labor Day weekend approaching, he looked forward to 3 nights off. Tim would start his junior year the following Tuesday. "How would you two like to go to a Diamondbacks game this weekend?" Brian asked during dinner on Thursday. "They're playing the Dodgers, and it's shaping up to be a great series." "Seriously? That sounds awesome." "Thanks, Dad," exclaimed Tim. "I'm not a big fan of baseball," grumbled Brenda. "I'll find something to do around the house." "I'm sure you will," Brian muttered under his breath, loud enough for Brenda to hear. "It's settled then. Tim and I will go to the Saturday night game." "Wow. I'll tell Scooter right away. He'll be so jealous." "He's a huge Dodgers fan," said Tim excitedly. "He used to live in Los Angeles." "Why don't you invite him along?" suggested Brian. "Watching baseball with friends is always more fun." "I'll call him now." "Thanks, Dad." Tim rushed off to grab his phone. "You really made Tim's day," remarked Brenda. "Baseball is a great way for you to bond with the boys. Horace is such a nice kid." "Wait, his real name is Horace?" Brian asked incredulously. "No wonder he goes by Scooter. Who names their kid Horace?" "Tim told me Horace's dad passed away from a brain aneurysm 2 years ago," Brenda explained, choosing to ignore Brian's comment about the name. "His mom moved them here this summer to be closer to her parents, who aren't doing well." "Well, I'll stick with calling him Scooter and pretend I never heard the other name," declared Brian just as Tim returned to the room. "Scooter's mom said he can come." Tim exclaimed excitedly. "This is going to be awesome." Saturday afternoon, Tim parked his truck outside a nice ranch house in a good neighborhood. Scooter dashed out the door and hopped into the truck before Tim could even come to a complete stop. "Mr. Welker? My mom wants to meet you before we head out. I guess she just wants to make sure you're not secretly a serial killer or something," Scooter explained apologetically. "Sorry about that." "No problem," Brian replied, stepping out of the truck and walking towards the house, where he rang the doorbell. A woman around Brian's age, slender and unassuming, opened the door. Brian couldn't help but notice her well-shaped legs, highlighted by her running shorts. Her grin suggested she knew exactly where his gaze had lingered. "My legs getting all the attention today, huh?" she quipped. "Well, they are quite impressive," Brian conceded with a chuckle, noticing her amusement. "Do you think I should let my son go to a baseball game with a man who eyes up every woman he sees?" she teased, raising an eyebrow. Brian detected the playful banter in her tone and decided to play along. "You're really asking if you should trust your son with any man, as appreciating women is practically a prerequisite," he retorted with a grin. "He's going to learn sooner or later, might as well be from a pro." "You better not be planning to teach my son any bad habits," she replied, still smiling. "Of course not. Just the essentials of appreciating beauty in the world," Brian replied, matching her tone. "That's a relief," she said, gaining even more of Brian's respect. "Well, have fun, and make sure Scooter calls if you're going to be late. By the way, I'm Gertrude." "Seriously? Gertrude?" Brian couldn't help but ask. "For my male friends, I go by Minx, Raven, Candy, or Bubbles. But you can call me Gertrude," she replied with a straight face. "Minx it is then." "We're going to be great friends," Brian declared with a smile. "Why am I not surprised?" Gertrude chuckled. "Horace can go with you any time. Tim is a polite young man, so I knew his parents would be fine. Thanks for letting him join us. We're a baseball family too. Used to go to a lot of Dodgers home games myself." My dad even played in the minor leagues, Brian added. Scooter's thrilled to be going. He's in good hands with you, Minx. Have a great day. Brian bid farewell before heading back to the truck. The game was a relaxing day out. Scooter even caught a foul ball. Both boys indulged in too many hot dogs and sodas and ended up falling asleep in the back seat on the way home. When they arrived at Scooter's house, Brian gently woke him up and escorted him to the door, where they were met by a smiling Gertrude. I think he might have overdone it with the hot dogs and sodas, Brian admitted with a chuckle. Of course he did. He was at a ball game. Gertrude replied with gratitude. Thanks so much for taking him and bringing him back safely. It was my pleasure. Scooter's a great kid, Minx, Brian replied warmly. I'll see you at the boys' games. Brian settled into a routine that suited him well. He would return home, have a small breakfast, and then sleep from 9 to 3. With the extra soundproofing and blackout curtains in his bedroom, he usually slept soundly. Brenda occasionally complained about him always sleeping in his man cave, even on weekends. She'd drop the subject as soon as Brian asked if she needed him for anything. Brian figured she was genuinely concerned about Grant insisting on sex in her bedroom and getting caught. That suited Brian just fine. It suggested she wasn't currently considering divorce. His goal of staying married until Tim graduated high school seemed feasible. Because of his role as foreman and reduced physical activity, Brian invested in a home gym machine promising a full-body workout. It proved effective as long as he used it consistently. He attended all of Tim's baseball practices, and soon the coach had him working with a few kids on the side while he led drills with another group. Tim was showing promise, but Scooter was a revelation. Initially timid, Scooter blossomed with Brian's coaching, and his confidence soared. Brian, enjoying the distraction from his personal life, threw himself into coaching. As Scooter's skills flourished, so did Brian's reputation among the other parents. His jokes landed, his coaching efforts were praised, and he even received treats from appreciative mothers. Tim and Scooter's friendship naturally brought Brian and Gertrude closer, and Brian admired her intelligence and humor. One day, Brian decided to ask Gertrude about the change in attitude from some of the mothers. I might be stepping out of line here, Minx, but I have to ask, Brian began. Almost a B cup. Gertrude quipped. I'm lost, admitted Brian. Usually when a man prefaces a question as personal, it's about bra sizes, Gertrude explained. But if you're asking about the moms, yes, they've been acting different. You really didn't notice? I'd need more context to answer that, Brian mused. I understand the infield fly rule, but you're not talking about baseball axioms, are you? No, I was talking about the unwritten rule of never bunting or stealing bases when you have a huge lead, Gertrude quipped before turning serious. If you'd been paying attention, you'd know the friendliest teen mothers are also single mothers. You're a great dad, a good-looking guy, and have a pretty decent job. That makes you a damn good catch in their book, reasoned Gertrude. What about the fact I'm a married man? Wouldn't they take that into consideration? Asked Brian. They have, responded Scooter's mom. That's why they haven't actually attempted to seduce you. No one's tried that yet, have they? No one seduced me, as if that's ever been a problem, replied Brian. I'm married, so I obviously can't be a good catch for anyone. Brian, I don't like how I seem to be the one who has to tell you this, but we're friends, so it falls on me. The mothers all know your wife is cheating on you. That's not bad enough. The rumor is she's shut you off from sex. You don't sleep together, and it's a foregone conclusion you'll become a free agent in the not-too-distant future. These women want to sign you up for their team as soon as you're released. Brian was stunned by Gertrude's revelation. How could so many people know his personal situation? Who would possibly know about his sex life, or lack of the same? Then it hit him. Brenda must have told that fucker we weren't sleeping together, and he's bragged about it to someone. That miserable cocksucker. Are you referring to your wife, or her lover? Asked Gertrude as she tried to lighten the mood. I have to say you don't appear to be all that surprised by the rumors. Did you already suspect Brenda was cheating? No, I never suspected, answered Brian. You had no idea at all, asked a disbelieving Gertrude. I knew she was cheating. I just never suspected it, responded Brian. You're losing me here. How could you know it without suspecting it? It's pretty simple. I never suspected a damn thing until the moment I found Grant banging Brenda in our bed. I went from having no clue she was cheating to certain in the space of a few seconds. I totally skipped being suspicious. That revelation creates more questions than it answers, stated his confused friend. You saw them doing the horizontal mambo, yet you remain married and you're not incarcerated. You're not a swinger, are you? Or a guy who likes to watch? Please don't be one of those creeps. I'm not. Don't worry about that, assured Brian. I decided to adjust my priorities. Being able to spend a lot of quality time with Tim and not being a part-time dad became my first objective. Living with Brenda, rather than divorcing her, seemed like the best way to accomplish it. I started working nights, and that's always been tough on our sex life. I built a nice apartment over my detached garage and I lived there. I told Brenda it was so I could get sleep during the day without being pestered and annoyed by everyday shit. She wasn't happy about the sleeping arrangements, but Grant told her every time she had sex with me, he'd insist on banging her in our marital bed. That seemed to worry her, just not enough to stop fucking him. She thinks her affair is a secret and wants to keep it that way. I didn't tell her, but I won't be having sex with her for any reason. I went to the clinic and was tested for STDs. I'm clean. I want to keep it that way. You're serious? You heard that? The bitch. How can she treat a guy like you so badly? What a jerk that guy is, fumed Gertrude. All the single moms think you'd be a great catch. I think you may have an inflated opinion of my desirability. I've never been the matinee idol type. I do have a good job, so that might make me look better to some of the more desperate women, offered Brian. Are you kidding? Look how handsome you are. You have a wonderful smile, pointed out Gertrude. You're strong, kind, smart, and great with kids. If I weren't so plain-looking and flat-chested, I'd have already tossed my hat into the ring, along with my full A-cup bra. I think I'd better shut the hell up. Thanks for being a good enough friend to tell me what people are saying and thinking, replied Brian with a frown. I didn't realize everyone knew I'm a cuckold. It's pretty embarrassing. I can't keep my own wife happy. I'm a world-class wimp. You're a good man who wants to be a good father to his son. You're strong enough to endure this bullshit so you can have a great relationship with Tim. Horace thinks you're pretty cool, too. Who? Asked Brian. You must be feeling better if you can tease me about Horace's name, observed Gertrude with a smile. Minx, you're a great friend. You've kept me from getting my head stuck too far up my ass. I just hope Tim doesn't find out. That horse has either left the barn or is getting damn close, revealed Gertrude. Horace says Tim knows things aren't right at home. You pretty much avoid his mother. He's bound to hear something when so many people know about it. You know what worries me, added Gertrude. Horace is sweet on Heather Grant. How awkward is that for him, and for me? She's a nice girl. She's got no idea what a miserable prick her father is. I'm just glad Tim isn't the one sniffing around Heather, stated Brian. What a mess that would be. I should be happy for small favors. Horace tells me Tim is pretty interested in Holly Ingram, but that shouldn't surprise you very much. She comes to every game and cheers for every move he makes, stated a smiling Gertrude. Yes, I've noticed her hanging around. She seems like a nice girl. I knew her dad and uncles in school, recalled Brian. They're a good family. 2 nights later, Tim's team was playing in the first round of the district championships. Brian realized as game time drew closer he was probably more nervous than Tim. It didn't help that the usual 3 single mothers were determined to get his attention. Norma Wilson was wearing a top that exposed a good portion of her ample breasts. She kept finding reasons to lean over in front of Brian to pick something up or look for something. Brian had to admit her cleavage was spectacular. Brandy Dorn opted for a snug sweater that highlighted her figure without revealing too much. Her slender waist and flat stomach accentuated her ample bust, drawing attention to her curves. She engaged Brian in conversation about the team and the players throughout the game. Jillian Patterson, on the other hand, was more direct in her approach. She made sure to stand close to Brian, subtly brushing against his arm or side. With a knowing smile, Gertrude handed Brian a soda and hot dog before returning to her seat. Brian couldn't help but notice when all three women suddenly found reasons to leave his vicinity simultaneously. His curiosity was piqued until he heard Brenda's voice behind him. "I thought I'd join my husband this afternoon to watch my son play. I didn't realize I'd have to wade through so many admirers to reach him," Brenda remarked loudly. "What's going on, Brian?" Brian attempted to deflect the question by commenting on Tim's performance in batting practice, but Brenda wasn't easily swayed. "Nice try," she retorted. "Why were those women hanging around you like flies on a turd? It's a good thing you aren't allergic to silicone." Brian admitted his ignorance, stating he had no insight into the workings of the female mind. Brenda defended her presence at the game, emphasizing her support for Tim. As they settled into the bleachers, Brenda couldn't help but notice the unfriendly stares from some of the other mothers. Puzzled, she wondered what could have caused their apparent dislike, considering it was her first game attendance. Gertrude caught Brenda's attention with her unassuming presence, although Brenda couldn't help but notice her well-coiffed hair and attractive legs. Despite the chilly weather, Gertrude seemed comfortable in her shorts. As the game commenced, Brian focused intently on the field. Tim's impressive double gave Brenda a moment of worry, but she noticed Scooter's newfound confidence and strength as he stepped up to bat. The first pitch zipped dangerously close to Scooter's head, prompting a slight leanback from him. Brenda heard Brian chuckle softly as Scooter readied himself for the next pitch. "Trying to intimidate those two boys is a big mistake," Brian remarked to those nearby. "I just hope the pitcher tries to sneak a fastball by Scooter." Agreement murmurs rippled through the spectators as the pitcher wound up for his next delivery. With added velocity, the ball rocketed towards Scooter. There was a resounding crack as Scooter's bat connected with the ball, sending it soaring over the center field fence. Cheers erupted from the bleachers as Tim crossed the plate, eagerly waiting to celebrate with his friend. Gertrude couldn't hide her pride as she watched her son round the bases. Glancing at Brian, she noticed a glimmer of tears in his eyes. She knew how much effort he had put into mentoring both Tim and her son, Horace. His joy and pride were palpable, a testament to the impact he had on their character development. Meanwhile, Brenda arrived at the pizza shop to join Brian and Tim for the celebratory gathering. However, she couldn't ignore the conspicuous proximity of Norma Wilson and Brandy Dorn to her husband. Their attempts to engage Brian seemed overly familiar, their ample busts frequently brushing against his arms and back. As Brenda approached, she noticed the sudden disappearance of the two women. Her mind drifted back to a conversation she had with her lover, Bill Grant, 2 weeks prior. "It's about time we got it on in your bed, don't you think?" Bill had pressed Brenda after a passionate encounter. "Banging you in your husband's bed really gets my motor running." Brenda hesitated, reminding Bill of their agreement to avoid her marital bed until she and Brian had reconciled physically. However, Bill's incredulity was evident. "Are you telling me you haven't been intimate with your husband since that day?" he questioned. "He must be up to something. No man in his right mind would pass up someone like you." Brenda vehemently defended Brian's character, insisting he was committed to their marriage. However, Bill's probing questions left her feeling unsettled, prompting her to question the true nature of her own actions. "Well, no. This is just a temporary thing. He's been too busy with work and Tim's baseball to pay much attention to me. I deserve a little fun. I work hard to keep the house and make meals, as well as work full-time," reasoned Brenda. "We know this won't last." Bill smiled as he considered Brenda's words. "I suppose you're right. We'll just enjoy the ride while it lasts. Give me a day I can fuck you in your bed. It still cranks me up." As Brenda recalled Bill's words, she became concerned as she watched the two bimbos hovering around Brian slink away. It was obvious he had some damn attractive women with big tits and tight bodies who were interested. She realized she needed to protect her marriage from the efforts of those bitches. Then she noticed Gertrude sitting off by herself. Brenda quickly formulated a plan. She put on a big smile and sat down next to a surprised Gertrude. "It's good to see you again, Gertrude. Horace has become quite a good ball player, and he's a very nice boy. You should be proud of him." "I am," admitted a wary Gertrude. "Tim is doing very well, too. The time Brian has spent with them is paying off. He's really been a great mentor for Horace." "Yeah, sometimes Brian is too good," responded Brenda as she saw an opening for a proposal. "I'm sure you've noticed how those big-tit blondes are always hanging around him. I was wondering if you could help me out. I know Brian would never stray under normal conditions, but he's a man, and those women are all but flashing their big boobs and spreading their legs when they're around him." "How do you expect me to help you out?" asked Gertrude. "Spray them with cold water when they get too close?" "You know I'm not able to go to most of the games and practices because of my work and other commitments," began Brenda carefully. "I know I can trust Brian with you. You aren't his type at all. If you would just stay close when I'm not around, I'd really appreciate it. I'm going to tell Brian he should stay closer to you and act more attentive. Those husband-stealing bitches will think he's settled on you and hopefully leave him alone. I know it may be embarrassing for you to pretend like that, but it's for a good reason. You could save our marriage." "Please let me see if I have this right," responded a disbelieving Brenda. "You're worried that these attractive, sexy single mothers might seduce Brian, so you're asking me to sort of stand in for you when he's at ball games and practices? You feel I'm a safe single mother because I don't have big tits and I'm rather drab-looking." "I didn't say you were drab. I just know Brian. For whatever reason, he's less likely to fall for you than some big-breasted ex-cheerleader type. You'd be helping him keep his vows." "You feel that cheating on your spouse is a deal-breaker?" questioned Gertrude thoughtfully. "Would it be so terrible if he tapped a few of those willing ladies as long as he kept you as his number one?" "I hope you're joking," rejoined Brenda. "I love my husband, but I'll never tolerate cheating. It's truly the deal-breaker you mentioned. It destroys the marriage contract. I could never condone infidelity. As far as I'm concerned, the marriage would be over. You must understand how I feel. You were married for years. I understand fidelity and loyalty. It makes sense that cheating breaks the marriage contract," acknowledged Gertrude. "I have to agree. I have to get over to Brian." "Can I depend on you to keep a close watch on him when I'm not around?" asked Brenda. "Oh yes," responded Gertrude with a smile. "Be sure to explain it all to Brian. I'll keep my part of the bargain. Who would be better to keep a good man celibate than a flat-chested, homely, boring woman?" "I wouldn't have put it quite that way, but you've pretty well covered it." "Thanks again," replied Brenda as she left to join her husband. "Last night, Brenda wanted to talk before I left for work," began Brain at the next day's practice. "The crux of it was there are too many sexy single moms hanging around me. She feels I would be much safer if I stayed close to you, Minx, or as she calls you, Gertrude." "Why don't I feel safer?" "You're a smart man. You know you're never going to be safe around a single woman, regardless of how small her boobs are and how plain she looks," joked Gertrude. "Minx, you're one of the most attractive women I've ever met," responded Brian earnestly. "You're the whole package, not just silicone and bleach." "Wow. You just made my job harder," admitted Gertrude with a blush. "I'll make an appointment to have your eyes checked after the baseball season ends. You'll find I have 20/20 vision, and I'm an excellent judge of character, with one glaring exception," stated Brian. "I seem to have misjudged my loving wife." "I think she may have misjudged us," replied Minx. "That is if you really find me attractive." Brian was amused at the reaction of the single mothers as Minx remained close by his side. He spent a lot of time chatting and joking with her. The most common reaction was disbelief, followed closely by disappointment. It took less than one practice for the Minx to cut him from the herd. The team's next game required a 3-hour drive to Middleburg. It was decided the team would travel the day before the game and spend the night at a hotel. It was hoped the boys would be rested and fresh for their next challenge. Brian had given rides to Jake Winston's parents, as well as Minx. The discussion en route focused on the team's chances of winning districts and possibly the state title. They arrived at the hotel right behind the team bus. Brian helped Ralph Winston retrieve his luggage from the trunk. Some of the parents, including the Winstons, had volunteered to chaperone the boys and would be staying at the same hotel. All the other parents had to make their reservations at different hotels. Since there were several games being played the next day, a great many fans and players were in town. 6 teams would compete in 3 games from different class schools. Before Tim had climbed on the bus, Brian had told him he would not be staying in the same hotel and to behave for his coaches and chaperones. He assured his son he would be at the team practice the next morning. "What hotel are you staying at, Minx?" asked Brian as the Winstons wheeled their bags to the team hotel. "The same hotel you are," was her simple response. "I never told you which hotel I was using." "How did you find out?" asked the perplexed Brian. "I didn't," was the brief response. "How do you know we're at the same hotel?" "It's pretty busy this weekend." "You may not be able to get a room at the last minute," pointed out Brian. "I'm sure something will come up," replied Gertrude with a big grin, confusing Brian further. Brian arrived at his hotel a few minutes later and asked Gertrude, "Minx, do you want to see if you can get a room while I check in? I can wait around to be sure you find something." "Thanks, but I'll just wait here." "I'll be fine," she insisted. Brain was finally beginning to see the light as he checked in and picked up his room access cards. He returned to his truck to find Minx waiting. "Is there any chance you'd like one of these cards to my room?" he asked. "It's room 207. "What a thoughtful gesture," exclaimed Minx as she stepped from the car, accepted the key, and kissed Brian on the cheek. "Let's get to bed. It's going to be a long night." Brian was far more tired getting up the next morning than he had been when he went to bed. At first, he had mentally struggled with the reality of breaking his marriage vows, but Minx helped him through it. "Let's look at this logically. Brenda has not only been unfaithful, but she's agreed to shut you off, sexually. Even if she hadn't, she would still be placing your health at risk by having unprotected sex with a damn tomcat. Effectively, she's made sexual relations with her both unsafe and undesirable. She's released you from your vows and your marriage contract. I haven't had sex in over 2 years. I've had checkups and I'm clean. You were tested after you discovered she's a cheating slut and you're clean. I went on the pill over a month ago in hopes of hooking up with you. Can you honestly give me one reason we shouldn't sleep together? Is it my looks? Your wife thought I was a perfect foil for all the big-breasted beautiful women who were showing an interest in you because she knew you'd never be attracted to me sexually. Am I just not desirable? Minx, you're extremely desirable. Don't ever suggest you aren't. I've never cheated on Brenda, and it's taking some adjustment to my thinking, but you've made a great case for us getting together." "I'm ready," declared Brian with a grin. "There's something else you need to know first," replied Minx. "Both my parents are in hospice and aren't expected to live much longer. My brother's been sending game films of Horace to a friend of his. The friend is the baseball coach at the best prep school in the LA area. If Horace gets a baseball scholarship for next year, we'll probably move back. I like you a lot, but we're not looking at a lasting relationship. It can't last. Look at us. You're a good-looking married man with a cheating wife. I'm a plain Jane with a son who has a chance to get an athletic scholarship to a good university. I have to do what's best for Horace," she concluded. "That's great to hear about Scooter," stated Brian proudly. "He's a good kid and a very talented ball player. I'm glad he'll have a chance to hone his skills against strong competition and gain a good education at the same time. You're the biggest reason he's being looked at by better schools. I know how much time and work you put in with him. It's ironic that you being such a good mentor to my son actually gave us the opportunity to move back to LA and away from you." "I don't think I'll be very good at a one-night stand sort of thing," worried Brian. "It might be better to forego sex entirely than to have one night of sex and go back to being a monk." "You silly man. I said we'd probably move back to LA for the coming school year. That's over 6 months away. A guy could get laid a lot in 6 months, unless he's too old for a steady diet of hot sex with a very needy woman. That's something we'll just have to find out. Will you live up to your nickname, Minx?" joked Brian. "I will for you, big boy," promised Minx. When you want me, just whistle, and I'll teach you how to whistle. I've always been told my whistling is quite respectable, quipped Brian. Then you're not doing it right, retorted Gertrude. The baseball team went on to win the state championship, and Scooter was awarded a scholarship to a prestigious California prep school. Both of Gertrude's parents passed away before Thanksgiving, within a week of each other. Brian and Tim attended their funerals. Brian met Gertrude's brother and liked him immediately. Brian, meet my brother, Dexter, introduced Gertrude. Dexter, this is Horace's baseball mentor and our good friend, Brian. Holy shit, exclaimed Brian. Your name is Dexter? Right, agreed Gertrude's brother. Only Gertrude and my folks ever call me Dexter. I answer to Grim with everyone else. What do you call my sister? I call her Minx, but don't ask why, insisted Brian. I don't think I have to ask, replied Grim with a laugh. Brian spent Thanksgiving with Brenda and Tim at her parents' house. For the first time in months, Brian found himself preparing for bed with Brenda. They always stayed over Thanksgiving night, and Brian couldn't come up with a good excuse to change that tradition. Brenda took her time removing her clothes in front of Brian. He tried to keep his reaction subdued, but his cock gradually responded to the visual stimulation. Brenda was a very attractive woman with a nicely toned body. We haven't slept together in a very long time, cooed Brenda. You must be in need of some lovin' by now. Make love to me. Brian felt bad about his next comment even as he replied. You finally admit you need to be properly serviced? I knew you'd break. I'll be glad to top you off and put a big smile on your face for the holiday. You miserable bastard. You won't be getting any pussy for years with that fucking attitude, snarled Brenda. What's wrong with you? You can just forget I was thinking of allowing you to even touch me. Okay, was Brian's only reply as he rolled over so his back was to Brenda. He didn't second-guess his comment, although it was out of character for him. It did achieve his objective, which was avoiding sex with Brenda. Brian did regret, however, that his marriage had deteriorated to its present state. Brenda was worried about Brian's snide comment, making sleep difficult. As she lay next to him, she wondered if he knew about her affair or if he was just being miserable because they hadn't been having sex lately. She decided she would have to discuss it with Bill. He needed to forget about having sex with Brenda in her marital bed if she had sex with Brian. That statement had caused her to avoid and deny her husband, which could eventually make him suspicious. It could ruin her marriage. Brian had a routine when he worked the night shift, home by morning, a quick breakfast, and then bed by 9 a.m. Often, he'd wake around 2 p.m. to find Minx naked beside him. They'd spend an hour together before she left to be home when Scooter returned from school. With baseball season over, this arrangement suited them both. One night in early December, Brian's phone rang shortly after starting his shift. Dad, Scooter and I are with Heather and Holly. Heather's car got a flat on D Street. We're kind of stranded, Tim explained, worry in his voice. D Street, by the arcade? Damn, Brian cursed. We'll talk later. Is that Heather's Corolla? Yeah, a 2017 Corolla, Tim confirmed. I'll grab a tire from Gus and be there. Keep safe and call the cops if you need to. Look after those girls. Brian quickly located Gus, who drove a Corolla like Heather's, and asked for a tire. Seeing Jack Reynolds, Holly's uncle, pass by, Brian invited him along. My son and his friends are stranded with a flat. I'm getting a tire and heading over. Mind joining us? Brian explained. I've got a real spare. Let's go, Gus responded, leading the way. As they rushed to help the stranded teens, they worried about the neighborhood's safety, especially for teenage girls. Meanwhile, Brenda, post-romp with Bill, answered Heather's call reluctantly. Why are you kids there? Well, too bad. Handle it yourselves. Call AAA. It's not my fault your mom doesn't keep a spare, Brenda snapped, overhearing the conversation and feeling uneasy about the situation. What was that all about? Brenda inquired as Bill hung up the call. Nothing serious, Bill replied, his hand finding Brenda's chest. Heather's got a flat, but she's calling AAA for help. As Brian and his friends approached Heather's car, they noticed several tough-looking guys nearby. Brian wasted no time in grabbing the necessary tools from Gus's trunk while Gus fetched the spare tire. Meanwhile, Jack leaned over and gestured for Heather to lower her window. "Stay put until we sort this out. If those troublemakers bother you, we'll handle it. Holly, you'll have some explaining to do with your mom about being on D Street," Jack instructed. Brian swiftly got to work, jacking up the car and loosening the lug nuts. When the apparent leader of the tough guys confronted Jack, Brian intervened by swiftly striking the man's shins with the tire iron, sending him to the ground in pain. Brian then subdued him, sitting on his back while continuing to work on the tire. As two others rushed forward, Jack and Gus quickly dealt with them, keeping the situation under control. Despite the gang's insults, Brian and his friends focused on the task at hand. With the tire changed and the tough guys dispersed, Brian confronted them, sending them scurrying away. "Get out of here," Jack commanded the kids, wanting them to avoid the area and steering Heather's car in the right direction. Once they were safely away, Gus and Jack commended Brian's swift action and laughed about the incident, relieved that everything had turned out fine. The men shared a laugh as they returned to their duties, spreading the tale of their nighttime adventures throughout the plant. Such stories were always a hit on the night shift, providing a welcome distraction from fatigue and boredom. The following afternoon, as Brian stirred from sleep, Minx eagerly joined him in bed, grateful for his heroic actions the previous night. "Horace filled me in on what happened. You were amazing," she praised. "I couldn't wait to see you." Meanwhile, Brenda found herself confronted by Sue Blaine, who had heard about the incident and wanted to discuss it. "I heard about Brian, Jack Reynolds, and Gus Benson handling those troublemakers near D Street," Sue said, clearly intrigued by the story. Brenda's mind raced as she realized the involvement of her husband, Holly, and Tim in the ordeal. She kept her emotions in check, but felt a surge of anger towards Bill for neglecting his daughter's plea for help. Later, she confronted Bill in the break room, seething with frustration. "Heather called you for help, and you brushed her off," she accused. "Brian and his friends stepped up while you did nothing. What kind of father are you?" Bill's flippant response only fueled Brenda's anger, solidifying her growing realization of Brian's superiority to her selfish lover. "Brian didn't know," Minx explained gently. "He suspected something wasn't right, but he didn't have concrete proof. Besides, he's not the type to stoop to that level. He's too good for that." Brenda's heart sank as she realized the depth of her betrayal and the extent to which she had jeopardized her marriage. She had been blinded by her own desires and had failed to see the consequences of her actions. "I've made a terrible mistake," Brenda admitted, her voice choked with emotion. "I've hurt the man I love and put my family at risk. How can I ever make things right?" Minx placed a comforting hand on Brenda's shoulder. "It's not too late to fix things," she assured her. "But it will take time and effort. You'll need to be honest with Brian and face the consequences of your actions. And most importantly, you'll need to rebuild the trust that you've broken." Brenda nodded, her resolve firming. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right," she vowed. As Brenda left, Minx turned to Brian, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Brian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted. "I never imagined something like this could happen. But I guess I have some thinking to do." Minx squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Just know that I'm here for you, no matter what," she said sincerely. Brian managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Minx. That means a lot." As he watched Brenda leave, Brian couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness and betrayal. But deep down, he knew that he would find a way to move forward, whatever the future held. "You're perceptive. What do you think most men would do upon discovering their wife's infidelity?" Minx asked, her tone calm and analytical. Brenda's voice trembled as she responded, "They'd probably get angry, yell, maybe even divorce." "That's a common reaction," Minx acknowledged. "What if Brian chose to prioritize staying close to Tim? How might he achieve that?" "He'd likely stay for Tim's sake, not mine," Brenda admitted softly. Even though he found out about Bill and me, he hasn't left. It's like we're already divorced, but without the legal papers. I just didn't realize it. You had your reasons, Minx reassured her. But now that you've ended things with Bill, what's next for you? I want nothing to do with him, Brenda asserted. That's understandable, especially after last night, Minx remarked. But what about you and Brian? Will you continue living together? We're comfortable with how things are, Minx explained. I'll be leaving with Horace before school starts. As for Brian, if he decides to move on, I might help him find someone new. Brenda's tears welled up again as she processed Minx's words. But you have no right to be with him, she protested. I was given that right when you chose Bill, Minx countered. And Brian and I have an understanding. We're exclusive and trust each other. The implications of Bill's potential infidelity hit Brenda hard. What if he's been with someone else? She wondered aloud. Minx's response was matter of fact. You should get tested as soon as possible. As for us, let's continue as we have been. I'll visit Brian, you keep your distance. It's been working fine so far. I won't do that, Brenda asserted firmly. You may be leaving soon, but I'm staying to prove to Brian that I can be a great wife. He won't need you. But he knows I'm faithful, unlike you, who's always available for anyone, Minx retorted. I control your sex life with Brian. I won't let him near your risky business while he's with me. I've learned that a relationship is more than just sex, Brenda replied, trying to sound confident. Sex without love or commitment is degrading. I'll be the supportive wife while you're just providing sex. Think about that. Sure, let's see who makes him happier, Minx agreed. You cook, clean, and play the devoted wife while I take care of his other needs. We'll see who wins. Brenda, I'm sorry for disrespecting you, Brenda pleaded with Brian. How could he ever trust you again? Minx interjected. You may be forgiven one day, but trust is hard to regain. Brian, why let her speak for you? Brenda demanded. She's not just my lover, but my best friend, Brian explained. While you were with Bill, Minx and I discussed this. I trust her to handle it. Would you mind giving us some privacy? Thanks for watching and have a great day. Write your opinion in the comments.